something happened in April 2026 that almost nobody in the Western press stopped to fully analyze. Japan, one of the most secretive military technology nations on the planet, handed India the full design blueprint of its most advanced stealth warship. Not a sales pitch, not a marketing brochure, the actual engineering plans. For a $500 million frigate that Japan spent decades developing and never shared with anyone. And China watched it happen. The question isn't just what this ship is. The question is why Japan did this right now, what India is going to do with it, and what it means for the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. A balance that's been shifting faster than most people realize. Let's start with the ship itself, because to understand the stakes, you have to understand what Japan just gave away. The Mogami-class frigate, officially designated the 30 FFM, is not a conventional warship. Japan's maritime self-defense force doesn't build ordinary ships. The Mogami was designed from the ground up as a multi-mission stealth platform, and the engineering that went into it draws directly from Japan's most classified aerospace program, the Mitsubishi X-2 Shinshin stealth fighter demonstrator. The same design principles used to hide a jet from radar were applied to a 5,500-ton warship. The hull angles are deliberately shaped to scatter radar signals. The superstructure is smooth, angular, and radar-absorbing. Even the antenna system is revolutionary. Japan's Unicorn Array, which stands for Unified Complex Radio Antenna, bundles what would normally be dozens of protruding antenna masts into a single horn-shaped structure. On most warships, those antennae light up like a Christmas tree on enemy radar. On the Mogami, they're nearly invisible. Now add the weapons package. Each Mogami-class frigate carries Mitsubishi Type 17 anti-ship missiles, long-range, sea-skimming, and among the most capable anti-ship weapons in the world. It carries the RIM 116 rolling airframe missile system for close-in defense against incoming threats. It carries Type 12 torpedoes for anti-submarine warfare. It has a 127mm naval gun capable of precision shore bombardment. And critically, the newer variants of the Mogami are being fitted with 32-cell Mark 41 vertical launch systems, the same launch infrastructure used to fire Tomahawk cruise missiles, extended-range anti-air missiles, and next-generation strike weapons. This ship can hunt submarines, shoot down aircraft, destroy surface vessels, and strike land targets. All from a platform that a crew of 90 people can operate compared to the 200 or more typically required on similar-sized frigates. That last number is what makes the Mogami genuinely groundbreaking. High automation isn't just a convenience. It changes the entire economics and strategic calculus of naval power projection. Fewer sailors means lower operational costs, faster crew training, the ability to field more ships with the same manpower, and significantly reduced casualties in a combat scenario. Japan built 12 of these ships, and now it's offering India the ability to build them domestically. Let that sink in. Japan has never done this before with any country. Not with South Korea, not with Australia, not with any of its allies who have been asking for advanced naval technology transfers for years. India was the first, and that decision didn't happen in a vacuum. To understand why Japan made this move, you have to understand what Japan's defense posture looked like for the past 70 years, and how drastically it has changed in just the last 3. After World War II, Japan operated under a pacifist constitution that severely limited what its military could do. For decades, Japan didn't export weapons, period. It didn't form offensive alliances, it didn't share military technology. It maintained a self-defense force, not an army. The entire framework was built around reassuring its neighbors and its own population that the Imperial Japan of the 1930s and 1940s was gone forever. But something changed. China changed it. Over the past decade, China has built the world's largest navy by number of ships. It has constructed artificial island fortresses across the South China Sea and installed military infrastructure on them in violation of international law. It has deployed Coast Guard and naval vessels to challenge Japanese fishing boats near the Senkaku Islands, territory Japan controls and China claims. It has conducted increasingly aggressive military exercises around Taiwan, And it has done all of this while systematically expanding the range and precision of its missile forces, to the point where American carrier strike groups operating in the Western Pacific now face genuine risk of being targeted by ballistic missiles launched from 1,500 kilometers away. Japan looked at that map and made a decision. In 2023, Japan passed one of the most significant security policy reversals in its post-war history, approving the ability to conduct counterattack strikes against enemy territory for the first time since 1945. It doubled its defense budget target, and it began quietly reforming its arms export rules to allow something that was previously unthinkable: sharing advanced defense technology with partner nations. India was the obvious first choice. Here's why. India and Japan share something more powerful than a treaty: they share a threat. China's strategic expansion isn't just aimed at Taiwan or the South China Sea. Beijing has been building ports, influence networks, and military access agreements across the Indian Ocean, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in the Maldives, in Myanmar. The Indian Navy has watched Chinese submarines and warships quietly establish a persistent presence in what India considers its strategic backyard. The two countries even fought a border war in the Himalayas as recently as 2020, leaving 20 Indian soldiers dead. China is pressing India from the north by land and from the south by sea. Simultaneously, that's not a coincidence. That's a squeeze strategy. India needs naval power it can build, sustain, and scale, and it needs it fast. And Japan's Mogami design is exactly the kind of technology that can accelerate that capability in a way that purchasing foreign ships outright never could. This is where the Mogami deal becomes more than just a ship purchase. Japan didn't say, "We'll sell you 6 frigates." Japan said, "Here are the blueprints. Build them yourselves. In your own shipyards, with your own workers, using Japanese materials and our technical support." That's a technology transfer. That's capacity building. That's Japan saying to India, "We don't just want to sell you a weapon. We want to make you the kind of power that can build weapons at scale, sustain them independently, and project force in your own theater without depending on anyone else." That model has a name. It's called strategic deterrence through industrial depth. And China understands exactly what it means. When a country can build its own advanced warships, its naval expansion doesn't stop at the number of ships it can afford to import. It stops at the limit of its industrial capacity, which, in India's case, is enormous and growing rapidly. The Indian Navy has already been pushing a major warship indigenous construction program. The INS Vikrant, India's first domestically built aircraft carrier, was commissioned in 2022. Indian state and private shipyards have been progressively taking on more complex builds. Adding the Mogami platform, with its stealth geometry, automation systems, and advanced sensor integration, doesn't just add 6 or 8 ships to the Indian fleet. It fundamentally upgrades the technical ceiling of what Indian shipbuilders know how to build. And there's another layer to this that most analysts haven't fully unpacked yet. Japan also offered something alongside the Mogami blueprint that doesn't get as much attention: the Unicorn stealth antenna system. This technology, the same system that makes the Mogami nearly invisible on radar, would be transferred to Indian naval vessels across the fleet. Not just Mogami frigates. Existing Indian warships could be retrofitted with Unicorn. Think about what that means. India's entire surface combatant force gets a stealth upgrade. Every destroyer, every frigate, every corvette that gets a Unicorn system becomes harder for Chinese naval radar to detect, track, and target. At scale, that's not an incremental improvement. That's a force multiplier. Now consider the Chinese side of the equation. China's naval doctrine is built around layered maritime area denial, the idea that you can use missiles, submarines, aircraft, and surface ships to create zones where an adversary simply cannot operate without taking unacceptable losses. China has invested decades and hundreds of billions of dollars into this strategy, specifically designed to push American carrier groups back and to dominate the near seas. But that strategy assumes it can see what it's trying to target. Stealth, genuine stealth, degrades that assumption. an Indian surface fleet equipped with Mogami-derived low-observable platforms and unicorn-fitted existing ships becomes harder to find, harder to track, harder to target. In a contested scenario in the Indian Ocean, that changes the calculus dramatically. And Japan knows this. This isn't an act of generosity. This is strategy. Tokyo and New Delhi are building an architecture of mutual deterrence, two powerful democracies on opposite sides of China's maritime expansion, each hardening their own defensive perimeter while deepening interoperability with each other and with the broader Quad framework that includes Australia and the United States. Think about the geography. Japan controls the northern choke points of China's maritime access to the Pacific, the Miyako Strait, the East China Sea corridors. India controls the southern choke points of China's energy supply lines, the Strait of Malacca approach, the Indian Ocean, through which 80% of China's imported oil flows. If both ends of that critical supply and strategic corridor are guarded by navies equipped with complementary, interoperable, highly capable stealthy warships, Beijing's strategic planners face a fundamentally different map than they did 5 years ago. China didn't see this coming, not because it was a surprise that India and Japan are getting closer. That trend has been visible for years. What Beijing didn't fully anticipate was the speed and depth of the technology transfer. Japan sharing its most advanced warship design, a design it has never given to anyone, represents a qualitative threshold that China's planners now have to incorporate into their threat assessments. And those assessments take years to translate into capabilities. China can build more ships, it can deploy more submarines, but it cannot instantly close the gap on a stealth and automation architecture that Japan spent decades refining and is now seeding into the Indian industrial base. The Mogami deal is not a transaction. It's the beginning of a naval manufacturing alliance. It's two powers that have historically kept their militaries tightly controlled and largely domestic, deciding that the threat they share is large enough and permanent enough to justify a level of technology sharing that would have been inconceivable a decade ago. The Indian Ocean is going to look very different in 10 years. The navies that operate in it will be faster, stealthier, more automated, and more lethal than anything deployed there today. The rules of engagement, the deterrence calculations, the risk assessments that govern how far any power can project force in that theater, all of that is being rewritten right now in shipyards in Yokohama and Mumbai, on design tables where Mogami blueprints are being studied by Indian naval engineers who understand exactly what they've been handed. Japan just changed the game, and the game is only getting started.